Hello, this video tutorial is about 12-tone triad sets that use regular triads in thirds only, that is, the major, minor, augmented and diminished triad. I'll present all possible set options. You'll see the analysis in terms of pitch class sets and the chord tension level classification. I'll show various approaches to creating chord progressions and short composition examples. First, you'll find a summary of 12-tone triad fundamentals as discussed in part 1 from this series. Then I'll present all possible triad sets with regular triads in thirds. Using triad set properties we'll create polychord progressions, and you'll hear short composition examples where these sets are being applied. Let's have a quick look at the creation of 12-tone triad sets, consisting of regular triads and thirds only, that is, the major, minor, augmented and diminished chord. The sets are shown in the keyboard and pitch class diagram on the left and in staff notation. The 4 triads must contain all 12 pitch classes from the chromatic scale. Here you see the example used in part 1, with 1 major, 1 minor and 2 augmented triads. This is option 1 from the sets that contain 3 triad types. As a side step, be aware that we also may identify more or less regular tetrachords, 4-part chord structures that, if stacked in 3 layers, also will cover all 12 pitch classes. I discussed these 12-tone chords with minimum tension in a separate video on this channel. You may remember from part 1 that the collection of 12-tone triad sets is limited. These pages show all the sets I could identify. They include the 7 regular triad sets presented in this episode. The modal triad sets are left for later. Let's return to 12-tone triad set properties, also discussed in part 1 from this series. The 4 triads in the set may be combined pairwise into hexachords. The next operation is the stacking of triads into polychords, for which there is a number of permutations, as indicated by the colored squares in the diagram. When displaying the example 12-tone triad set in the axis diagram, you may evaluate the 3 pairwise combination options into hexachords shown here in terms of pitch class set label, interval class vector and the Hindemith chord dissonance group classification. Chord tension levels may be classified by combining and mapping 3 approaches. You will have seen this diagram before, with the Hindemith chord dissonance classification into 6 groups on the right and the scale with the 9 Ulehla tension levels on the left. Both these were presented in separate video tutorials, as were the essentials from pitch class set theory. Relevant for this video is the inspection of the 6 elements in the interval class vector. Now it's time to have a closer look at the 12-tone triad sets with triads and thirds. The 7 options include major, minor, augmented and diminished triads. The sets may contain between 4 and 1 different triad types, and I'll proceed with a walkthrough of all 7 options. We'll first look at the single option for a set with 4 triad types. It is shown here for the major triad on root C, and further includes the E-flat minor, D-flat augmented and G-sharp diminished triad. We look at the set properties diagram and evaluate the characteristics of the 3 possible pairwise combinations, such as S1 plus S2 versus S3 plus S4. What we see is that these combinations yield 3 different 6-element pitch class sets, for which the label and interval class vector are shown. All sets contain a tritone interval since n6 is greater than or equal to 1. And since there also are many dissonant second intervals, as indicated by the sum of n1 and n2, these all belong to the Hindemith group 4. We are dealing with highly dissonant hexachords. Stacking of triads transforms the hexachord combinations into polychords with a total of 12 permutations. For this triad set with 4 chord types, I've created example voicings. Polychords are notated as S2 over S1. Also note the marking of the highly dissonant interval class N1, the semitone, in the staff. These are the minor 2nd, major 7th and minor 9th intervals. The voicings demonstrate somewhat increasing UTL tension levels by careful dissonance distribution over the chord structure. We start with the 4 polychord permutations of the first hexachord combination. The staff shows the chord and pitch class set labels. Next we combine S1 plus S3 versus S2 and S4 for another 4 permutations. Note close versus open position voicing and chord inversions, as these are fine-tuning tools for subtle chord tension nuances. And we conclude with 4 polychord permutations for the third hexachord combination. Application of the 12-tone triad set with 4 types is postponed until the end of this video, where I present a 12-tone jazz composition example. Next we look at the 12-tone triad sets with 3 different chord types. The first option includes 1 major, 1 minor and 2 augmented triads, and this was the set used extensively in part 1 from this video series. Inspecting the properties diagram, we see that the hexachord combinations yield 3 different PC sets. The combination of S1 plus S2 versus S3 and S4 has no tritone interval and therefore is classified as the somewhat lower tension HG3 category. Note how the different combinations lead to increasing numbers of dissonant second intervals, as indicated by the sum of N1 plus N2. This set has more tension control potential than the 4 triad types set, the reason why I've used it as an example in the first episode in the series. From the polychords, we create a chord progression, or, as Schillinger calls it, a chord structure continuity. In this continuity, we connect 3 polychord pairs. We use a single combination only, but we change the triad stacking order of the first polychord. We use augmented triads as pivot chords with overlapping pitches for the connections. S4 becomes S3, and that yields the tonic of the transposed set. Thus we obtain a sequence C to A to F sharp. The chord tension level somewhat decreases from Hindemith group 4 to 3 at the end. Note that I've created a 3-layer setting with all augmented triads in the middle. The voicing is close position triads in either root or inverted position. Listen to this chord progression. Here I introduce what Schillinger calls an instrumental form. In a dedicated book he presents a set of techniques to create more or less real music from a given harmonic framework, that is, our polychord continuity. Instrumental forms yield parts that can be performed by real players. Remember that the Schillinger System was introduced in the 1930s. However, thinking in terms of instrumental forms is still relevant in our present time, with sequencers, DAWs and virtual instruments. So what you see here in this condensed score is the application phase with the 12-tone triad set converted into an instrumental form. The middle layer with the augmented triads has become an ostinato quarter note arpeggio pattern for celesta. The upper layer is assigned to a solo violin and high strings section. The violin melody has pitches from 2 layers, using subsets from the polychord structures. The bottom layer is set as sustained chords for low woodwinds and contrabasses. I use instrumental forms as an essential design tool for fine-tuning tension control, where I deliberately compose with subsets and intervals between parts. In this application example, the result hints at second Viennese school 12-tone music, somewhat reminding of the Anton Webern style. And now to the second option for a 12-tone triad set with 3 triad types, which is a set with 1 major, 1 minor and 2 diminished triads, again shown here with the major chord on root C. The analysis diagram for this triad set reveals that the hexachord combinations yield 5 different pitch class sets. All of these contain a tritone interval, since N6 is greater than 0. All have an equal number of dissonant second intervals, with N1 plus N2 is 4, and they belong to Hindemith chord group 4. From this you may conclude a limited tension level control potential. From the 4 triad set we create a chord continuity, shown here in staff notation. We connect 2 polychord pairs before returning to the original polychord. The example is based on 2 combinations and 2 stacking permutations. Once again, since this set includes 2 diminished triads, we use this property to use overlap and pivot chords for finding the tonic of the transposed set. Here we obtain tonic pitches C and F. From the voicing I determine the Hindemith root by looking for the lowest perfect fifth interval in the polychord. When this is not the lower triad chord root, there is reduced stability and somewhat increased tension level. From the polychord sequence root movement I infer Schillinger chromatic root cycle numbers. This tells me something about the cadential character of a continuity, which is almost absent in this example, except for the descending minor third E flat to C at the end. All chord structures are in Hg4, so this is a constant high dissonance polychord progression. Designing an instrumental form from this harmonic framework is the best tool for still somewhat influencing the dissonance distribution and tension level. Here I write a rhythmic pattern that is beat shifted between the 2 layers, yielding a Hocketes-like texture, full of syncopation and accents. It is set for a pizzicato string section, and in each layer there is variable density between 1 and 4 parts, which will involve pitch doubling. There is an intensity increase towards the end. Careful selection of intervals and subsets prevents or reduces dissonance clashes between the layers. After considering the 2 options for 3 triad type sets, we continue with 12-tone sets that only contain 2 triad types. In this case we see 2 major and 2 minor chords, each on a root a major second apart. Analyzing this triad set using the diagram, we observe how hexachord combinations lead to 4 different PC sets. One pairwise triad combination is classified as Hg3, the others as the higher tension class Hg4. Once again, we see the 3-4-5 pattern in the number of dissonant second intervals, which implies that there is some potential for chord tension control. We connect 2 polychord pairs in this continuity. Note the 2 combinations used. Here we see a different approach to selecting the tonic when connecting polychord pairs. I used the major and minor triad root interval property for creating polytonality. In this case, moving from tonic G flat to F, the upper layer triads are D minor, E minor, F and G major. This sequence corresponds to the triads on diatonic degrees 2 to 5 in C major. The lower layer hints at the key of D flat major or minor, but we have achieved polytonality here. Inspecting the Hindemith root and Schillinger root cycle pattern, we conclude the absence of stability and cadential character. The continuity shows the H-G tension pattern 3-4-3. An alternative 6-part voicing is shown here, with a wider compass and more open position voicings. I've marked the outer part's contrary motion. Finally, just for the fun of it, I swapped the two layers and would like you to experience the different harmonic character of the D flat layer on top of the C major tonality. The instrumental form is designed to be played by a rock group. The continuity is first played as sustained chords, then as a rhythmic counterpoint between upper and lower layer, electric lead and bass guitar. The polytonal character may be classified as a weird prog rock setting from the 1970s. Now watch what happens when swapping the layers for the same instrumental form. Forget about getting this track in the charts. There's a second option for 12-tone triad sets with two types, major and minor triads, but this time there is a different interval between the respective roots. This time they lie a tritone 6 semitones apart. Study the consequences in terms of triad set analysis. This symmetry reduces the number of different PC sets to 3. Two pairwise combinations into hexachords lack the tritone interval. With N6 is 0, these are classified as HG3. The remaining combination has a higher number of 3 tritone intervals and yields HG4. Looking at the sum N1 plus N2, this is another case of the increasing number of dissonant second intervals. So this triad set has considerable tension control potential. For the continuity with this 12-tone triad set, we connect 3 polychord pairs. I decided on demonstrating all 3 hexachord combinations, and again use the pivot chord approach, first with the D minor chord, then with the F sharp major chord. The triad set tonic is the constant pitch C. The Hindemith chord root changes as shown here, and we see many root movements by multiples of minor thirds up and down. The final polychord raises the chord tension level from Hg3 to Hg4. From this given chord progression, I create an orchestral texture through an instrumental form that uses variable density, gradually increasing the number of parts from 1 to 9 at the end, while there is a Ulehla tension level curve with pattern UTL 839. The instrumental form sketch is further processed, introducing a 3 plus 4 plus 5 8-note beats rhythm that is played by marimba, piano and muted brass. In the upper layer we hear sustained tremolo strings. This is an orchestral suspense texture. And here is the third option for 12-tone triad sets with 2 chord types. This is special in the sense that it does not contain major or minor triads. Instead, there are 1 augmented and 3 diminished triads. Studying the pairwise triad combination into hexachords, we see only 2 pitch class sets. And even more remarkable is that they are so-called Z-related, meaning that these sets have the same interval class vector with elements 224, 322. All combinations belong to Hindemith group 4 and there hardly is potential for chord tension control. Still, we will apply a polychord pair, for which here 1 combination and 2 different voicings are shown, the latter a more open voicing with contrary motion in the outer parts. Remember that we have constant Hg4. In the application I'll demonstrate a new approach, in this case integrating the 12-tone triad set in a conventional diatonic harmonic context. What we see here is an instrumental form with a tonic dominant pedal point in the bass. Again, there is a variable density starting with the unisono C in 3 parts and a maximum of 8 parts at the last polychord in measure 8. The opening 4 chords are diatonic and in thirds, with an incomplete C major triad followed by G major, C minor 11 and an extended altered G7 chord. Then we have the 2 polychord pairs yielding a climax before closing on an extended C major chord. Note how the tension level increases from UTL1 to the maximum of 9. With careful instrumental form design and orchestration, it is very well possible to mix traditional harmony with the advanced, highly dissonant texture from 12-tone triads, as this orchestral setting demonstrates. And now the final regular triad 12-tone triad set, the option that consists of 1 triad type only. It is the set of 4 augmented chords on chromatically ascending roots. I find this set too poor to use for analysis and in an example composition, so I decided to reject this option. Instead, let's demonstrate a somewhat longer composition example that uses the first set with the 4 triad types: major, minor, augmented and diminished. And here is a continuity that uses 2 hexachord combinations and 2 polychord permutations. From our earlier analysis we know we are working with constant Hg4 chords. Connections are once again obtained through the G-sharp diminished pivot chord. I want to create a setting for jazz big band that plays block chords and counterpoint. For the block chords I select pitch class subsets from the given polychord continuity that strengthen the jazz flavor. So here are the triad combinations that yield chord structures with chromatically moving inner parts with tritones and more static sustained outer parts. Another jazz-style voicing means looking for structures with a perfect and augmented 4th interval, that is 5 and 6 semitones. And here we see the triad combinations that include or generate such a voicing. These will also be set as tutti block chords. Another instrumental form takes the given chord continuity and transforms it into a 2-part counterpoint. The main subject is in 8th notes with leaps and syncopations. The counter subject has chromatic stepwise motion character. The roles are changed in the latter half of this phrase. With a bit of creativity, we may use the same harmonic continuity for creating a 3-part counterpoint, extracting 3 motive types that again move through the parts. Since this phrase is only 4 measures long, I created an alternative 3-part counterpoint setting that will be used in a transposed version. And now the full composition, an up-tempo 180 beats per minute, 41 measures long 12-tone jazz big band setting for 5 saxes, 5 brass and a rhythm. Read along with the annotated condensed score. This video tutorial is about 12-tone triad sets with regular triad types and thirds. I demonstrated 6 out of 7 possible options, starting with analyzing the triad set properties. In the diagrams you will find pitch class set labeling and Hindemith chord group classification for the pairwise combinations into hexachords. When stacking triads in polychords, there are various permutation options and, depending on the voicing, different Ulehla tension level classification. Remember that we are dealing with highly dissonant chord structures. I demonstrated how to create a polychord continuity, transposing the sets, changing combinations or permutations, and using connections with pivot chords. Careful instrumental form design in the application phase may yield all sorts of musical styles, and may reduce the harshness, the high dissonance level that is inherent for these 12-tone triad sets. I leave the modal triad options until the next episode and hope that you will be inspired to use these regular triad 12-tone polychord sets yourself. If you find these tutorials useful, please press the like button and subscribe to my channel. Help me to increase channel visibility and share this video. In case you would like to support my knowledge sharing and online teaching efforts financially, use the link to the PayPal donation button below. Visit the website for more content or purchasing ebooks from the webshop. Thanks for watching.